Hello, welcome to Sunday's edition of Cracking the Cryptic. And today we're going to be taking a look at this puzzle on the screen, which is by Ryan Oswald. This will be, I think, the third puzzle that Ryan's contributed to Cracking the Cryptic. His first two puzzles have been very popular, and our testers suggest that this will be no exception. Very interesting, slight variant on Sandwich Sudoku that we've got today. But a couple of other announcements to make. We're going to be continuing our schedule of 2 videos a day for the forthcoming, well, for the next week at least. Mark's doing a video later on tonight on Sam Kappelman-Line's Killer Sudoku from Sam's recent Hard Sudoku series. So the Killer Sudoku won the poll as the puzzle you'd most like to see. So Mark's going to be taking a stab at that one for you. Also, just to mention, oh yeah, we've got 2 puzzle hunts coming out tomorrow. So one of our viewers has been busy creating an adult puzzle hunt and a junior puzzle hunt. I'm going to release them both on Patreon tomorrow. They won't be behind the paywall, they'll be free. And the junior puzzle hunt is intended for younger children. It's going to be for sort of, I just said 7, 8, 9-year-olds would enjoy it. So if you do know anyone in that age category who you think is either into puzzles already or might want to get into puzzles, then definitely get them to check that out. Other things, we have a viral video going a bit crazy at the moment. So the video we recorded the other day on Ard van der Vettering's magic square anti-knight diagonal Sudoku with only 4 given digits has amassed an astonishing number of views in very few days. I think it's up to something like 600,000 views, which is incredible, absolutely incredible. And we've had even some celebrities who seem to have seen it. I think James Charles, who some of you may know, especially if you're watching this from the States, he tweeted last night, and the tweet certainly suggested he was watching the video. So yeah, it's really quite incredible times. Now, if you are new to the channel as a result of that, what do you expect if you watch Cracking the Cryptic? Well, every day you should expect a world-class puzzle to solve. We do an inordinate amount of testing on the puzzles we get sent, and we get sent an awful lot of puzzles, and we try and select the very best. So every day you can be guaranteed, if you come to Cracking the Cryptic, you will be faced with an incredibly good puzzle, and even if you can't do it, then you can watch Mark or I solve it. So that's what we aim to do. At the moment, as I say, we've got 2 puzzles a day because of COVID-19. Now, let's talk about Ryan's puzzle. How does it work? Well, we've got a mixture here of Sandwich Sudoku. You can see the clues outside the grid. Let me talk about how they work. Let's look at the 21, for example. What this is saying is that wherever the 1 and the 9 go in this column, let's say the 1 goes there and the 9 goes here. Oh, I'm going to fix my mouse in a second. These 4 squares would have to add up to 21. So similarly, if we look at the 30 column, you know, if this was a 9 and this was a 1, these squares here, these 6 squares would need to sum up to 30. So that's what the clues outside the grid are telling you. They're telling you the sum of the cells sandwiched between the 1 and the 9 in that column or row. Now, there is another twist to this. It's called Ryan calls it a snake sandwich, because you can see there's a 1 at the top of the grid and a 9 at the bottom. Now, there has to be a snake going from the 1 to the 9, and by snake what we mean is we must go from the 1 to a 2, to a 3, to a 4, to a 5, etc, etc, until we end up with down here an 8 and a 9. So we have to move orthogonally, which means we have to go, we can't go diagonally. We couldn't go from this 5, say, to this square as the 6, because that would be a diagonal jump. It must be a cell that shares a complete edge. So the 6 could be there, and we have to wend our way down the grid to this 9. Now, there are some rules about the snake. The snake can touch, so it can go back on itself like this. That would be permissible. But what it can't do is it can't sort of cross over itself. So if, for example, from here it went 1, it's going to be difficult to do an example of how it could cross over itself using the digits I've got in the grid at the moment. But it couldn't sort of do this, then come back here and go round and then down. It has to be just one sequence, but it can turn back on itself like this. So it's got to end up down here with the 9. Now, that's an interesting constraint. I'm sure you'll agree. I've no idea what it means. It's not a variant we've seen before, but testers say it's brilliant. So I'm going to have a go at it for you now. If you want to have a go, you click on the link under the video as usual, and that'll take you to our webpage where you can play along. And with that, let's get going. Let's get cracking. Now, there are some very big clues I can see immediately. We've got a 28 and a 30 clue there. So, in fact, that's going to mean we have to put a 9 there. How do I know that? Well, it's because I've done a lot of sandwich Sudokus, but let's actually think about the logic. If we have a sum of 30 between the 1 and the 9 in this column, that is a very big number. We know that the total for the column, if we add up all the digits in this column, what are we going to get in the finished solution? We're going to have the numbers from 1 to 9. If you add up the numbers from 1 to 9, you get 45. Well, if I have a 9 here, for example, and a 1 here, and then these cells in the sandwich sum to 30, then I've got 31, 40. That would mean this square here has to be a 5. Now, the key with this column, I think, is going to be to say, is it possible that any of those 3 squares there are a 1 or a 9? Well, clearly it's not possible. If this was a 1, even if I put the 9 as far away as possible, I mean, let's actually do that the other way around so it makes a bit more sense. What can we make those 4 squares add up to? Well, I can make them 8, 6, 8, 7, 6 and 5, but that only adds up to 26. It doesn't add up to 30. So there's absolutely no way that there is a 1 to 9 in those squares. Now that means, if we think about it, there must be a 1 or a 9 in these 3 squares, and in fact there's a 1 here. So we know for certain there's a 9 in those 3 squares, and there's a 1 in those 3 squares. Now we've got a 28 clue here. Now we can do exactly the same logic here. If we try, let's do it the right way around so that we don't get a clash in the column. We do a 9 here and a 1 here. These 4 squares can add to 26. This is 28, so that's not going to work. We cannot have a 1 or a 9 in those 3 squares. So we know there's a 1 or a 9 in these 3 squares. We know from this 1 it's going to have to be a 9, and the only square that's going to fulfill both of these criteria is this one. So that is where I would start. That's now let's have a think about what else we can say. Well, let's look at the bottom row. We've got a 19 sum here. So 19, it must be at least 3 squares. So there's no way the 1 can be in those 3 squares there. And it can't possibly be as far away as this. Because if this was a 1, let's think about that for a second, then we'd have these yellow squares here would be summing to 19. Plus 1 is 20, plus 9 is 29. If we know that the row sums to 45, this square would have to contain the number 16. Well, it doesn't. So that's just, this can't be the 1. And therefore, we have an interesting feature in column 2 again now. Let's ask it whether this square could be the 1. And the answer is that it can't. Why not? Well, 4 squares can't add up to 30, that's why. So that's got to be the 1. This square's not a 1 or a 9, and these 2 squares have got to add up to 5, because we know 1 plus 9 plus 30 in the sum is 40. These 2 squares have to bring the total to 45, so you can see that these have to be a 2-3 pair. And actually this is maybe the first opportunity to use the, yes, this is the first opportunity to use the snake logic. Can this be a 3? Now if this is a 3, we know that we've got to go down a chain that starts with a 1, 2, 3 combination. So that means this square has to be the 2, but now I can't connect this 2 to this 3. I can't put another 3 in the box. So that's not going to work. This is going to be the 2, which means that square must be the 3. We get the 3 at the bottom as a result of that. We can colour in the 3. Okay. Now actually I'm wondering now whether we can do something with the 9 in this. we need one of these squares to be an 8, don't we? So this is interesting. This is interesting. Because if this is an 8, that would mean that this square would have to be a 1. Why do I say that? Well, it's because if we look at the outies, the sums outside, the cells outside the sandwich in this column, they must sum up to 8 because we've got 27 plus 1 plus 9, that's 37. We know the column is 45, so there are 8 total outside the sandwich. So if we put the 8 here, this square would have to be a 1. Now that is a problem. Sorry, just to make it absolutely clear, obviously if I put the 1 there, this square would have to be an 8, because we know that we need to make 8 outside the sandwich. So if I get a single 8 here, I've obviously got a clash in the column. So this isn't, the 1 would have to go here, and now that is a problem, look. Because now I would have to put a 1 in one of those squares, and that breaks the 28 clue. So that is quite cool, because what that means is this square cannot be an 8. This square must be an 8. And in fact, thinking about it again, this square can never be a 1, can it? The 8 doesn't really matter. From that perspective, I simply can't put a 1 there because that's going to break row 2. The 1 simply has to be there. That has to be the 8. That's the corollary of what I was just saying. I was just being a bit slow getting to it. So now we can do a whole load more penciling or colouring. Those can all be coloured in green, look. This square here can't be a 1 or a 9 because if it is, we have a 0 in this row, which would mean that the 1 and the 9 would need to be adjacent to one another. There would be a 0 total between the 1 and the 9. So we can colour that in. We can colour all those in green. This square can't be a 9 because if it is, the 2 here would mean we'd have to go 9, 2, 1. And that's not possible. That repeats the 2 in that column, look. So that square's got to be green. I had an idea actually about this puzzle as I was typing it into our software. And that idea was, let me explain it to you. I don't think I'm going to be able to use it, but I was thinking about how we would go down these chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so that we ended up down here. You can see obviously the chain is going to have nodes on it where it repeats. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc. So there are going to be cells or adjacent cells along the snake where the snake goes from the number 9 to the number 1. Now, why is that interesting? Well, if we think about that, wherever those happen to be, let's imagine it was in these two squares, and these were on the snake, you'd have to have a 0 in the sandwich clue. Because whether this is in this direction or in this direction, you know, there is no difference between, there is no cell between the 9 and the 1. So, I'm wondering whether that's why there are very few clues given around the edge here. Because if all of the clues were given, we would be able to pinpoint with a high degree of certainty where the 9 and the 1 on the snake were. But we do not know that at the moment. So I've got to think, I mean, there could be one in this row, look, with the 0 here. But I don't think that this couldn't be the first time that the snake went from 9 to 1 because it's too low. I mean, you can't get from this square here to this row 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I guess you could there, look. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 if this was a 1. Oh, okay, so maybe you can do it. Anyway, this is all pontification. Let's try and actually make proper progress using some logic here. We can put a 1 in there. There must be a 1 in one of those two squares because of this one here. Now that does mean that we can't use these two squares, doesn't it? Because this, in fact, the fact that one of these is a 1 allows us to place the 1. That can't be a 1. That's a 1. That must be the 9 because of the 0 total. If I had put the 1 here, the 9 would have been here and it would have shared the box with this one. So that's an easy win. Let's put that in. We don't know anything about this column yet. We know there's a 1 down here. The 14 clue now. That's interesting. The 14 clue must include an 8. But we know there's an 8 in one of these three squares. There's nowhere I can put the 9 legitimately, which isn't going to force the 8 into the sandwich. If I put the 9 there, these two squares would have to be 6 and 8. If I put it here, these would have to be 2, 4 and 8. Actually, let me just think about that, because we need a 7 in one of those two squares for the... So if there's a 7 in one of these two squares, there is a 6. Oh no, 6 can be in all sorts of... I think the 6 can be in all of those squares. So even if we can tell whether... Got a 19 clue here though as well. So this can't go 8, 7, 6. So if this is 7, this is 6, and this... The 9 would have to be here. I'm not sure. I don't see anything that prevents that from being... There's no reason the 9 can't be here, I don't think. Well, if there is, I'm not quite seeing it. So, where do we go next? 2, 4. I'm not at all sure I know. This can't be a 9, obviously that's going to make this sum too large. I can green out both of those squares. So there's a 9 in one of these two positions. Let's label that up. And 14, 8, 17, 20. That square has to be a 7. Look, we've got 28, we've got a 9 and the 1 in the row. This square must be a 7. 9 plus 1 plus 28 is 38, obviously. And then we need 45 in the row. Golly. They can be greened in. Oh, so maybe I can use this 21 total then. So, let me think about this. Not actually sure I can use it. 21 has to be a 3 cells at least. 8, 7 and 6 you can get to 21. I mean, it's possible this is the one. If it's not the one, there are still options, aren't there? Oh, that's something interesting. Look at the 2 row. This square can't be a 1. Because if that square's a 1, this square will be a 2, and that square would have to be a 9, and it would repeat in the column. So this square is not a 1. So that we can pencil 1s into one of these 2 squares. Ah, now we can maybe do some logic. Can we or not? 1 second. Let me just think about this for a second. Yeah, we can, I think. If we look at this column, is it possible that there is a 1? It's not possible that the 1 is higher up in this column than the 9. Because you can't put a 1 in either of those squares. So the nearest, the furthest up the column I could put the 1 would be this square. Now if I put the 1 here, because the 9 has to be 3 cells away, the 9 would clash in one of these positions because of this 9 already placed. So we know the 9 is at the top of this column somewhere and the 1 is at the bottom. So if this square is not the 1 in this column, the 1 would have to be in one of those 2 squares. Because if it's any higher, we can't make the sum equal to 21. And that doesn't work. Wow! Because if the 1 is in one of those 2 positions, it meets some friends over there on the right hand side. So we've now found 1s in box 5 and box 6 in rows 5 and row 6. So where are we going to put the 1 in row 4? Well, we have to put it here. This is the only valid position. If we try and put a 1 down here, we're going to get repeated 1s in these rows. So the 1 has to go there. But that breaks the puzzle, because now we've got this 2 clue. I'd have to put the 9 there, and there's no way that this equal, if I have the 1 in one of these 2 positions and the 9 here, you cannot get to 21. So, actually this square down here is the 1. Now that must be helpful. I'm hoping it's helpful anyway. So now the 9, that be the 9? Well, definitely that can't be a 9. Oh. Right, now yes, we can do more logic. Let's look at these 2 squares. Now we know a 17 sum has got to be at least 3 squares. So, I can't have a 1 or a 9 here, because otherwise there's nowhere in this column to place the other digit. So the 1 or the 9 is in one of those 2 squares. Well, it can't be in that one, because there's already a 1 and a 9 in the row, so it must be in that one. That's a 9. And now 1, 2, 3 squares. The 1 must be in one of those 2 squares, meeting its friends over there, which means the same logic applies. That square's got to be a 1. This square is a 9, but it can be a 9 now because this 1's right on the bottom and that creates enough space for it. This square is a 2. 9s. No, we can colour in all of those. This square here has got to be a 1 because of basic Sudoku and shading that we've already done. Ah, now this 14 clue is now forced. Look, this has got to be the 9. That gives us the 1 and the 9 in box 3. Now that's now completed. This is a 1-9 pair. And now we are starting to get somewhere at last. What a puzzle. This is not easy. Now look, we've got 1, 2, 3, so this has got to be a 4. Now the next digit is a 5 in one of those squares. This is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. Now, let's look at this position and think about what I said earlier about the importance of the fact that we have to have a 9 and then a 1 along the snake. So we're here after 4 cells. So what are the options for the 9, 9, 1? You can see we can come this way. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1. That would be one option. If we come the other way, we can't come to this 9 because the 1 isn't next to it. So we've got to find another possible 9, 1 option. Now if we come down here, 5, 6, 7, 8, this would have to be a 9. And this would be the 1. And that looks quite good because that's a 2. So there are only 2 possible ways of finding a 9 and then a 1 in this grid from this position. But this one, 5, 6, 7, 8, clashes with the 8. Therefore, this is not valid. So I think this has to turn downwards. It has to come this way. We've got to get to a 9. The only 9 that can possibly be next to a 1 is that one. This is a 1, this is a 2 then, that's absolutely forced. And now we need, well now we've got loads of stuff going on just from the Sudoku side of this, because that now fixes a 9, 1 there, that gives us a 1 here. We've got a 14 sum now, which is 4 cells, so there's only one way that works, and that is quite interesting how that works, because these squares have to be 2, 3, 4 and 5. That's the only way of getting to 14 in 4 squares without using a 1. And what do you know? This is now quite interesting. This 2 here means this is the 2. These squares have got to be 3, 4 and 5, so it is incredibly likely that this is the way this continues. If it doesn't, it would have to come up here, and this would be a 3, and we mustn't put the 4 in row 2 because it will clash, so this would be the 4, 5, well the 7 has to be here, otherwise it's going to hit this one, so 6, we can't avoid this 8, there's no way. This 7 and this 8 clash. So this is the way the snake continues. Now we've just got to figure out whether this goes... Oh, look, we can use parity. So this 5 has to hit a 9 in 4 cells time. Well, that means that it has to be on a sort of checkerboard position with the 5. It's got to be in this position. This way, this 9 is a knight's move away. And that means that that's going to be 3 cells away rather than 4. So this has to come down. It has to turn this way. It has to go there. 8, 9, 1. Now this, which of these is the... the 2 here fixes that this is the 2. So the 6s can be in either position. But surely this has to... 1, 2... I think it's going to have to go 3, 4, 5. It's going to have to go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, isn't it? There's no other way, because yes, it does. Because if we try and go up here, then the only way of getting back down is going to be to cut across the snake we've already made. So that is not valid. If I try and go down, there's no space. 3, 4, 5 breaks with the 5 there. 6, 7, 8. That just doesn't work. Let me just double check that. So 3 here would have to be 4 here, would have to be 5 here. That doesn't work, definitely not. 3 here, we know it doesn't branch up, so it must branch down. This now has to be a 5, this has to be a 6, and this has to be a 7. Wow. Wow. That is absolutely beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. And now we've sort of wrecked the puzzle because we've just drawn a massive great snake through it that's given us so many digits. I can't believe this sandwich Sudoku now is going to be too hard. We've got a 19 here, so that's a 4. That means that's a 4. 4 in one of those two squares. We've got the 2 here in the 14 sum. So these two squares have got to include a 4 as well. This has got to be 2, 4, 8. And that being the case, that's not a 4, this one is. These two squares, what do they have to be? 6 and 7? Yeah, we can fill those in. There's a 7 there. That's a 7, that's a 6. The 9 here fixes that this is a 9. Oh, what a denouement that is. It's a lovely idea as well, isn't it? Really, really clever. 6, 9. That square we can write in now. Look, that's an 8, that's an 8, that's a 4. What's a 4 over here? We can fill in this 21 clue. If we look up there, we've got 19. That means this one must be a 2. That one must be a 2. That must be a 2. Into these 3 squares we need 3, 5 and 6. So the 3 is here, the 6 is here, the 5 is here. These squares are 2, 3 and 4. So that's a 2. That's a 3 and that's a 4. That should be a 5. That looks good. Those two squares are 2 and 4. Again, that's doable. It's all coming together. It's just brilliant, isn't it? It is just brilliant. This is a 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 and 7 there. That's all fixable. That should be fillable. That's a 5. We need 3, 6 and 7. So that's a 6. This is a 3. This is a 7. 7 must go up there. That must be a 7. This should be a 3. 5 and 6 into those two squares. Let's put that in. That makes that square an 8. And in this box we still need 3, 5 and 6. So that's a 6. That fixes the 6 and the 5. That's a 3. Yeah, we're done. And let's just draw the snake to make ourselves feel good. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Colour that in red. That's what you should be looking at. Wonderful, Ryan, I loved it. Yeah, come back later on for another edition of Cracking the Cryptic.